I've tried to review this game countless times in the past, but I never felt fulfilled with what I've had to say about it, so it's time now to give it another shot, hopefully, once and for all. But before I do, I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. ThorHighHeels for his amazing review of the game, as well as his other stuff. I do recommend you check it out. Oh wait, you want to see my review? Well, here it is!
Crash Bandicoot games are possibly the most rich, original and user-friendly platform games you could get on the PlayStation 1, and it was no wonder that he was the unofficial mascot for the console. Still maintaining a huge fan base even in 2015, the character was always stuck to what he's known best, platforming and racing, if on a few occasions changing up the formula. It's debatable whether Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped was the catalyst for the huge decline of platform games on the PS2, not because the game was bad, on the contrary, it was so good that everyone tried to be CB3 and just resulted in bad or painfully adequate mascot games. The worst thing about this is that the Wrath of Cortex, often labelled as Crash Bandicoot 4, also suffers this problem, because while it is a CB game in name and to some extent nature, there's so little that belongs to Crash, and instead just celebrating the innovations of the third Naughty Dog game. See, Crash Bandicoot 4 doesn't necessarily improve on the game's prior like the first three did, instead it just replaces platforming with an excess of vehicle control segments and levels dedicated entirely to it, and I do mean replace rather than complement, as there's few levels that Crash can test his new abilities on the player's own platforming skills. Not only have the good things about Crash Bandicoot been pushed aside, but also the villains, which are also pretty awesome. In this installment, Uka Uka has finally become the main antagonist instead of the likeable Dr. Cortex, and complains that his mortal henchmen aren't spreading enough evil around the world. Because of Crash constantly thwarting their efforts, they've almost given up. I'd actually like to see what these amazing scientists and beasts could do with their skills if they weren't wasting them on world domination. But anyway, Cortex reveals his secret weapon, if reluctantly, to the evil twin of Aku Aku, and it only requires something to power it up.
And if you guessed crystals, you'd be right! If this was Crash Bandicoot 1, 2 or 3.
Yeah, why exactly are the crystals needed? Even the ending makes a point about Crash not having all the gems if he didn't get them all. Don't worry about that being a spoiler, it's not as though the climax of this game is worth holding your breath for. Uka Uka needs to resort to the elementals, or the master like himself, which are responsible for the natural disasters of the world, and for some reason they're portrayed as the baddies, even though the planet needs them for anything to survive. Huh. When Cortex infuses the power of the elemental mass with his secret weapon, it's sent out immediately to stop Crash. We'll get round to why this is absolute cack in a moment. Your adventure begins in a hub world all too familiar, and not as cleverly designed as the previous platformer. Stuck inside the Matrix, you only have access to a single sub-lobby with the 5 levels, and with there being 5 sub-lobbies, that totals to there being 25 levels, not including boss levels or hidden stages. Despite being numbered, the levels can be played in any order, so you're free to dive into a good level or the 4 other painfully adequate vehicle stages. The objective of every stage is the same as always, to grab the crystal inside each level and reach the end. Merely reaching the end is easy enough, as is finding the crystal, but you need that purple spike to unlock the boss level and move on to the next zone, and it's in level 1, Arctic Antics, where I noticed a heap of problems with the character's controls. For starters, Crash doesn't feel as fluent as he used to, and it's really hard to describe. It feels like he's lugging rocks around in his shorts, yet when he jumps it feels like he's in zero gravity. This doesn't help when precise platforming is involved, like when you're trying to jump on the crates that change contents every second. What also doesn't help is that I don't know when I'm going to take off from the ground and where I'm going to land, again being a pain for trying to hit enemies. This is made significantly worse by the depth perspective, as it took me till the final stages to get used to. I often avoided enemies and tried my hardest to go round the pitfalls just because of this. It's a shame to do so when Crash is well equipped for the dangers ahead, with his signature spin attack and belly flop, improved by abilities that you can unlock from the boss battles, even if some of them are from the previous game. But still, Crash is capable of getting the crystal, but it's up to the player to be able to get the gems, be they hidden behind difficult alternate paths or through secrets. You can also get clear gems from simply destroying all the crates in the level, and I have to admit, I've never had this much difficulty doing so since CB1. Unfortunately, that's mostly because of the cheap trial and error segments, poor hit detection, and the insistence of using vehicles. For some reason, Traveller's Tales thought that Crash wasn't capable enough of getting all the crates on his own, so decided to pack levels with moments when you're in a jeep, minecart, in a ball, or the worst of all, a submarine. The submarine's the worst because it makes Crash a bigger target, it's slower to turn around when a mine falls down, and the weapons require pinpoint accuracy to be effective. This should be game design 101. If the vehicles make Crash less effective in every way, they done goofed. It's so easy to miss crates because of this, and it doesn't help when the controls are inconsistent. Because of the huge amount, and fair play to the devs, it's a nice variety, it's hard to remember which buttons accelerate, brake, aim and shoot. And you know what? You'll probably only use each vehicle twice or 3 times in the entire game. Still, it's not all bad when Coco is playable, and this time she's not just confined to a tiger, a plane or spaceship, but she has her own platforming stages too. I remember hating these years ago, but now I really like her segments, and I hate to say it, but her levels are my favourite in the entire game. Her movement feels more organic and her jump feels way better compared to Crash's. Unfortunately, her attacks suffer in the same way as her brothers, as a spin attack is pants because it keeps you stuck in one location. It's bad enough I can't spin on the move and be able to hit my target. So when you're not doing this, you'll be in the vehicle stages, and now's a good time as any to explain why I hate this. First off, I don't mind them as long as they're in moderation. The vehicles in the previous games, be it riding a boar, a polar bear, a motorcycle or a plane, were all good fun because they were a treat, a break from the usual, so to speak. The big issue with them here is because of the sheer excess as well as their unintuitive controls, they break the pace of the 2.5D platforming I'm used to and take some adjustment in the first few goes. The transition between platforming and vehicles and vice versa is jarring and doesn't make for an immersive experience. Not to mention that none of them are particularly exciting, though I remember as a child enjoying the hamster ball stages, which I'm sure are self-explanatory. The times when you're on rails are my favourite because any steering you do yourself is slippery and the speed controls can make you miss crates to the point where you give up. Airborne machines have their own problems, such as ineffectual dodging, meaning that while you can spin out of harm's way, you'll find your way back into it shortly. Your weapons are also inconsistent, as sometimes you'll have rapid fire, and in other vehicles you may need to lock on your target and charge up a shot.
I really don't understand why this was needed, considering there's already a good Crash game with vehicles and combat, and that was Crash Team Racing. And a few years after the Wrath of Cortex came Crash Nitro Kart and Crash Tag Team Racing. And combining platforming and racing in Crash Tag Team Racing made a better platforming game in that than Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex. The platforming in a racing game is better than the platforming in a platform game. Huh.
Hell, even the boss battles of CTR were more interesting than those of Wrath of Cortex, partly because there's more than one boss. Crash Bandicoot, Cortex's secret weapon, uses only one element at a time to conquer Crash in each of the lobbies, and this is another great example of a great concept ruined by too much innovation because they mostly use vehicles. Even in the second boss battle, where it consists mostly of jumping and ducking, it seems grossly unfair due to the depth perspective. Still, despite my frustrations with it, the water elemental fight was my favourite, if only because it's a lesser evil more than anything. You might be wondering, what happened to those decent, memorable villains of the previous games? You know, the ones that are fair, challenged, tested your reflexes and wit, plus had amazing dialogue and music. Well, they were scrapped to make way for this. Riveting viewing, I'm sure. No, they were pushed into older levels to act as enemies, replacing the generic goon characters, which I liked as a running gag. It's a shame to see how the mighty have fallen, but hey, it's satisfying to defeat Crusher all the same, and by doing so you get a brand new ability, so it's not too bad. On second thoughts, it kinda is. Some of the abilities like the Death Tornado and Double Jump are really fun but aren't necessary most of the time, whereas the only new one like the Sneaky Shoes help navigation across nitro crates which hardly see any use. I'll tell you why, but if I say the word beginning with the letter V one more time, I may explode. The one ability you'll probably use the most is after the final boss, which if you've played CB3 Warped, you'll know these are the Sprint Shoes. These will help your performance in time trials massively, which you can attempt after getting the level's crystal, and by doing so, you can unlock new levels in the secret lobby. And I really must talk about the level design because it's some of the best stuff I've seen in the series. While the art styles aren't perfect and most of them are just factories and castles we saw in the first two games, I still saw some of my favourite levels like the jungles, forests and arctic zones in a new light. It's simply because it embraces 2.5D far more than any other game in the series. The camera doesn't so much as follow you, but the level itself, twisting and turning to make for some clever traditional platforming sections and transitions. And hey, any game that takes a leaf from Colina or Pandemonium's book immediately has my attention. This is only made more enjoyable by the surprisingly good graphical fidelity of the game, especially when it never dips below 60 frames per second. The airborne sections aren't great, but the texture quality and the art style is stunning for the time, and I can forgive some of the more bland looks when it offers some beautiful sights. The music on the other hand has its peaks and troughs because no two level tracks are the same. The only consistent song style is that of the bonus stages, which is basically the same one as Crash 3's. Only not as good. If I'm totally honest with you, there were like 3 tracks which I liked and the rest were adequate at best.
Before we finish this review, it's time to chomp through the succulent wumper that is my final thoughts.
Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex could have been a great game if not for too much innovation, or at least innovating in the wrong places. With only one new ability which replaces the Super Body Slam, a new crate which grants temporarily invulnerability, and new motors, what can this game offer that you've not had already? And while being Crash Bandicoot 3.5 isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's downright inexcusable to have mediocre controls, game-breaking perspective issues, frustrating trial and error moments, and levels that take about 30 seconds to boot up, and you're gonna suffer with me. I might have been able to recommend the game had it not been for the prior issues, but there were way too many times where transport came in for no reason. Even the mech suit, which is used for standard platforming, is significantly worse for combat and manoeuvring. My harshness against vehicles isn't irrational. I love the polar bear of Crash Bandicoot 2 and the jet ski of Crash 3, but I also remember the slippery moving motorcycle of that same game and the rusty controlling boar of the first title. This game was a chance to improve on those janky yet awesome modes of transport, but the game made all of them worse and sacrificed decent gameplay for it. Would I then prefer a game with the same floaty and unfair platforming though? Of course not. Diversity is what made the Spyro series great, and it did amazing things for Crash's legacy, but it has to be solid, it has to be playable, and that's why I'd recommend other mascots like Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, KO the Kangaroo, and Jak and Daxter over this particular CB game.
I don't hate this game because it's not a Naughty Dog game, but because I've seen devs handle licenses a lot better than their creators at times. I used to hate that Insomniac lost the rights to Spyro and it was passed on to other devs, but at least A Hero's Tale came out of that and it became my fourth favourite entry in the IP. I was kind of hoping the same would happen here, but alas, I don't think it has. Maybe you do, let me know in the comments below. Until the next time, I'm Johnbonne, your #1 source for #2 games, and if you'll excuse me, I'd like to practice my Crash Bandicoot success dance that he does at the end of a level. I'd do it now, but I'm too bloody fat to do so. Ta-ta for now.